Welcome, everyone. This is your Wheel and Anchor Trip Inspiration 2023 Part 2. So I'm excited to have you all here today, and we're going to get started. The purpose of this webinar today is to give you some insight about the survey which you will have received following last week's webinar. It is all about having you, our members, help us to decide what trips we should run in 2023. I'd like to run all the trips that we put on the webinar last week and this week, but a great amount of effort, as you know, goes into these. So we want to be sure that we have the kind of trips that members actually want to go on. And some of these are actually ideas from our members. And for those of you who have not joined us before, I'll do a very quick intro about Wheel and Anchor. We are all about bringing travelers together. My experience over the last over 30 years of organizing trips for Canadians has led me to really gain an understanding on what makes trips a lot of fun and what makes them a learning experience, and what makes them most rewarding for our members. And basically, it's when you have a group of like-minded people that come together to sort of explore the world and share some laughs and, share a glass of wine and all those wonderful experiences. And so that really is what Wheel and Anchor is all about. My personal vision for each and every one of you is that you be well-traveled and well-connected. And so I know I've shared this quip a couple times before, but I think back, I think about, and you may have the same experience, but if you talk to people that have gone around in different parts of the world and they've explored, people who are well-traveled generally come back with a bit of a different perspective and a greater understanding, because often we look at our world through the lens of international media, and that's, in these days, perhaps as much as ever, as we watch this pandemic all around the world. But when you've gone to a place, your relationship to it, your understanding of the people, the culture, and so on is completely different. And of course, you also become very well connected to the people that you meet, both your travel companions and as well as all the wonderful local people in all these countries all around the world. So that is our goal. As I mentioned, the trip inspiration, the questionnaire that you will have already received. And if you haven't received it, we'll be putting it again in this week's webinar, the link to that questionnaire. We've made it simpler this year. The idea is that we're presenting a very quick slide outlining the intention of the trip. It doesn't give any details because we haven't got to that stage of planning, but it basically outlines why we're going to this part of the world. And so it's the answer to the question is, it's basically, would you like to be on the pre-release list or maybe not? And so the idea behind this is that if you think it's the type of trip that you might actually want to go on, then you can click on that, put me on the pre-release list. Of course, there's no obligation, but it just helps us to sort of say, look, how many members would be interested in going to this destination in 2023? Now, of course, we run many of our trips, in subsequent years, but we never really know. It's always a bit of a guessing game in terms of what we'll be able to run when. And we are having some small prizes like we did last year. And so for 10 members who are selected randomly from all of the people who submit their questionnaires, we're going to be sending out a good old-fashioned Canadian Tire gift card, because who can't use the Canadian Tire gift card? I'm sure we all can at some point or another. Without further ado, we have a lot of destinations to cover today, so let's get started. The first one we're going to do, and we're presenting them this time somewhat chronologically. We presented our LiveAways that were going to be in the winter of 2022 and 23 last week. And so now we're going from the spring through the summer and the fall of 2023. The dates may change, nothing is set in stone, but when we did our planning for the whole year, this is what I thought would be the most optimal time to travel to these destinations. So first off, Austria. This is a country that is very near and dear to my heart, Austria and Northern Italy. And we're going to be doing a 5x5 there. And the 5x5 is basically spending 5 days, 5 nights in 5 different stops on an itinerary. Why 5 nights? Because, you know, many of you have been probably on trips where you go and you spend a night or 2 in a hotel, and half the time is, you know, packing, unpacking, and having to move on to the next destination. And so when you spend 5 nights, we split the time roughly evenly so that half the time is an organized part of the trip where we go and see some of the main things of that particular area and region. And the other half the time is where we have time at leisure. And that's what most people have said to us when we've talked to our members. There's not enough leisure time on a trip. So our 5x5 through Austria and Northern Italy will take in, of course, the capital city of Vienna. Many of you may have visited it already, but there's so many aspects to Vienna that one doesn't see on every trip. And it's a great city for wandering around. We'll then go down to the city of Graz, which is the second largest city in Austria, and we'll visit the beautiful province of Styria. In German, it's called Steiermark, and we'll go to places like, it's rolling countryside, and they call this actually volcano country in Austria, because there was all volcanoes that created these mountains where you see the vineyards like you see here, and the castles like Regensburg in the last slide. So we'll spend 5 days there. We'll then head to the southern part, to the Lake District in Italy. That's the province of Carinthia. And here you get the foothills of the Alps, and some amazing lakes, and very interesting culture here, because you are at the crossroads between Slovenia, Austria, and Italy. We'll then move into the Dolomite region of Italy. You can see here, known for the jagged peaks, and we'll spend some time in the city of Bolzano, Italy, which is nestled amongst these very craggy sort of mountain peaks. There's spas down there, and it's South Tyrol. So it's the former, it actually used to be part of Austria. So people in this particular province of Italy actually speak German. And then, oops, I jumped ahead. And then the final stop on the trip will be to Como. And Como is right in the very northernmost part of Italy, on the border to Switzerland. One of my favorite spots. I used to go there when I lived in Europe years ago for long weekends. And it is an incredibly beautiful lake surrounded by mountains, great cuisine, and you know, a lot of people from Switzerland, from Milan in particular, and from Lugano and Zurich spend their weekends around Lake Como. So it's really quite a beautiful part of the country. So that will be our Austria and Northern Italy 5x5. We will run again, of course, in spring of 2023, our Tuscany LiveAway. We introduced the LiveAway concept in Tuscany earlier this year, and the response has been fantastic. I think our trip this spring is already almost sold out. It's split into 2 parts. So the first part of our trip, we will spend in beautiful Florence. We'll spend 2 weeks exploring this incredible city with all of its tributes to the great masters of art. And, you know, the city itself is just an amazing place to wander around, visit galleries and museums. And of course, the Florence food is absolutely to die for. We will spend the second part of our trip in Cortona, which is a city, a small town, actually, a hilltop town in the southernmost part of Italy. And here we'll get to have the true Italian villa experience. You see here an example of one of the villas that we have in our program. And so I know that a lot of members really love the idea of staying in one of these beautifully designed, often centuries old villas that have been well restored. And from here, exploring the Italian countryside, all the great food and the wine. Here you get a shot of Cortona itself. And this area of Tuscany is all hilltop towns. And so the countryside is incredible. We can do some hiking, biking. Of course, wine tasting is a big part of it. I mean, you'll all be familiar with some of the wines that come from this region. Montepulciano is one of the beautiful towns that we'll visit. Tuscany is, I think, on pretty much anybody's bucket list. And actually, I find that a lot of people like to go back for the second time. Okay, Joel said there's a little bit of a lag on the slides, so I will try and advance them a bit slower. So then our next program that we're going to bring back, and we did our Wheel and Anchor program here to Japan and South Korea about the last time was 3 years ago, because of course we've missed a year now. And a lot of members have been asking for Japan and South Korea. And Japan is, well, it's a fascinating country. It's modern, it's bustling, but at the same time, it has a very traditional part to it, particularly when you get out of the big cities. And so our trip around Japan and South Korea will probably follow on more or less the same footsteps as we did the first time we did it, because we got very positive feedback from the trip, and people said it was a great insight into Japan. And so we'll start off in the city of Tokyo, which in and of itself, one of the largest metropolises in the world. And, just to savor, to take in Tokyo and wander around the markets and just see the urban Japanese lifestyle. It's oozing with excitement. It's so much fun. After spending a few days in Tokyo, we will then head off to, oops, I went one too fast. We will head up into the mountains of Nagano Prefecture. And of course, Nagano you'll recognize from the Olympics that were held there back in 1998. And this is where we sort of take a bit of a step back in time of Japanese history with places like the Matsumoto Shrine. And we'll cross over the mountains, and you'll be amazed in Japan because we think of it as a very densely populated country. And of course it is, but when you get out into the mountains, it really is amazing how much empty space there is. We'll also visit on this trip Hiroshima, which is of course most known for the site of the nuclear bomb that was dropped at the end of World War II. And that was one of the most sobering parts of our trip, was visiting the Hiroshima nuclear memorial that is there. And it's something that I hate to call it a highlight, because you certainly don't reference a tragedy like that as a highlight, but it really, I remember, opened a lot of people's eyes. And there's some beautiful countryside in and around Hiroshima as well. And we organized lots of fun little activities on our trip, doing a Japanese tea ceremony, for example. We also did gold leaf painting on chopsticks. And in case there were any members that were with us on that trip, you'll remember that it was fun to participate in some of these ancient Japanese traditions. We'll travel around by TGV. I recall one of our members having said that was, for him, the highlight of the trip was taking the TGV between Hiroshima and Osaka and Tokyo, which is what we did on our trip in 3 years ago. We'll visit the city of Osaka as well, and Kyoto, and a number of other really amazing parts of Japan. The second part of the trip will then head down to Seoul, Korea. And Seoul, again, it's in many ways it's like a little Japan. And of course, the Japanese occupied Korea for such a long part of their history. And so what I found interesting was the stories that the Koreans tell, the relationship that they have towards the Japanese. And there's still a little bit of an animosity there. But Korea, of course, has launched forward as an economic power in the last 20, 25 years. And so you see modern cities, but you also see, and you really get an insight into the Korean history and the role that the Japanese played. So we'll spend some time in Seoul. We'll also visit the south, which is, this shrine here is in Busan. So we'll have a taste of the northern part of Korea, but also the southern part in Busan, and the beautiful countryside that exists along the south shore of Korea. So the next trip on our list is another little bit of a different approach to travel. This is our Iberian sojourn. And a lot of members had asked about traveling through Spain and Portugal. And I thought a lot about this because you know, I've traveled fairly extensively through both Spain and Portugal, and I've looked at a lot of the itineraries that even I've created in the past for Canadians traveling. And there's so much ground to cover that we decided to create this as a modular trip. And so this particular trip consists of 4 one-week segments that you can do one of, or you can do 2 or 3 or 4. And so the first one that we're doing is the Camino de Santiago. And the Camino is probably the most well-known pilgrimage, certainly in the Western world. The full Camino goes all the way from the border between France and Spain through the hilly and somewhat the gentle mountainous countryside of northern Spain, and ends up in the city of Santiago de Compostela, right, at the cathedral there. We're not going to do the whole thing. It's about 600 kilometers, but rather we're going to do the last 100 kilometers, which is the official distance that you do in order to be able to get the certificate that says you completed the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage. And for a lot of people, it's, you know, the scenery is certainly lovely and charming, but there's something more to a pilgrimage. It's about the people you meet along the way, and it's about the reflections that you do as an individual. So I won't say it's not an easy walk, but it's also not a challenging hike. It's sort of a combination, and we're going to do that last 100 kilometers in 10 days instead of in a week, so that it's not as demanding as it would be if we tried to do it in a week. The second part of our trip in Iberia is going to be Porto and the Douro Valley. And Porto, we offer in a couple of different ways, because this is a city that I think deserves a lot more attention than it actually gets. It's the second largest city in Portugal. It's at the mouth of the Douro River, and you see here a picture of the Douro Valley. I know a lot of trips go there on a river cruise, but the Douro River is actually not very long, so you don't cover too much ground on a cruise. This is why if you can stay in the city of Porto and explore a lot of the terraced vineyards and the little villages and towns simply in a day trip from Porto. So that'll be the second part of our Iberian sojourn. And then the third part, we're going to head down to the south coast, the famous Algarve. And of course, the Algarve is a destination to which Europeans, particularly the British, flock in the summertime for the spectacular coastline, the beautiful beaches, but there's so much interesting culture and great cuisine here as well. So we'll probably stay in the town of Portimao, which is again one of the how should we say, nicer, more established tourist towns on the Algarve, and from here we can tour around and take in some of the other interesting places along the coast. Then our final week of the Iberian sojourn will be in Andalusia. Andalusia is the southern region of Spain. The most notable cities there, and where we will likely stay on this segment of our journey, will be in Seville, another Olympic city, as you'll recall. And from Seville itself is so, again, oozing with character and culture. You get a lot of Arabic influence in Andalusia, in the southern part of Spain. And from here, we can visit some of the Sierra mountain ranges. We can head up to Cordoba, famous for all of its olive oil plantations. We'll go down and see the Rock of Gibraltar, from which point we can look across the strait to see Morocco and Northern Africa. So this will be a very exciting and a wonderful place to spend a week on our last leg of our Iberian sojourn. Then in June of 2023, we're going to visit a couple of islands in the Mediterranean that you've probably heard of, but you've never maybe thought of traveling to before. And so this is our Tyrrhenian LiveAway. Why do we call it Tyrrhenian? Well, it's the Tyrrhenian Sea that is the part of the Mediterranean where Italy and France meet, and where you find Corsica and Sardinia. And Corsica and Sardinia, again, most people, they're not on most people's bucket lists, simply because if you go to France and Italy, you tend to visit the bigger, the well-known places. But these are two really amazing islands, because although they are France and Italy respectively, they have a bit of a different flavor of the culture there. And a lot of people actually come from parts of Northern Europe and they retire in Corsica. Why? The coastline here is absolutely incredible. And the northern tip of Corsica is called Cap Corse. And it's like a finger that points out towards France, and they have incredible walking trails. So this will probably be a little bit more of an active live-away, and we'll spend part of the time in the city of Ajaccio, which is in the west coast. That's the largest town in Corsica. We might even divide this live-away into 2 stops in each of Corsica and Sardinia, because believe it or not, Corsica, although it looks like a small little blob on the map, is actually 200 kilometers from north to south. So there's a lot of ground to cover, a lot of culture, and some incredible views. The second part of our live-away, we'll head down to the incredible island of Sardinia. And here's an interesting factoid about Sardinia, is that they have among the longest living people in the world. There's a couple of parts of Sardinia that are called blue zones, where they have the highest number of centenarians, so people 100 years of age and over in the world. And so it's no wonder that, again, this is a favored destination for retirees coming from all over the world, because there must be something in the water or in the food that has people live so long. We'll visit the Maddalena archipelago in the north and maybe sail around the islands. Incredible mountain villages, and again, Italian cuisine, but not just pasta carbonara and lasagna like you'll find in the mainland, but they have some very unique dishes that are unique to Sardinia. We may spend the time, and we haven't worked out all the details on this. We'll spend part of the time in Cagliari, which is the principal city of Sardinia at the south coast, or Olbia, up at the north coast, which, as I mentioned, is a gateway to some of the archipelago up there. So that is our Tyrrhenian live-away. We're planning to happen in June of 2023. From there, in June, we'll also be running another iteration of our very popular Croatia, Slovenia, and the Adriatic coast. So if you haven't thought about going down here, it is one of the most incredible small ship cruises that you can do, and certainly the most popular one that we have on an offer. We spend the first part of our trip at Lake Bled in Slovenia. And, you know, I remember the last time I was there with the Wheel and Anchor group. Again, that was 2 years ago. And, you know, we often forget about Slovenia. It's a small country that's, you know, stuck in between Croatia and Austria. But the scenery here is as beautiful as anywhere as you'll find in Austria and Switzerland. So we spend the first few days there. We then head down to the Croatian coast. We get on a small ship. We visit places like Korčula here with its herringbone streets. Our ship is moored right down there where you see the sailboat in the harbor. And the nice thing about this trip now is that we spend the overnight in port. So you can actually go meander into the town and enjoy dinner in these little villages. Which is, I think, a big advantage on the way that we've organized this particular trip. Of course, we'll visit Dubrovnik, which doesn't need any introduction, the pearl of the Adriatic. And we try to time our visit there so that you get a chance to climb up on these famous walls. So that's our trip to Slovenia, Croatia, and the Adriatic coast. In the summer of 2023, we're going to be going back. Again, we're heading this coming summer, summer of 2022, on our Scandinavia and the Baltics 5x5. Again, the same concept as I described earlier, 5 nights in each destination. And in this case, we'll be visiting 5 of the principal capitals of Scandinavia, starting off with Copenhagen, a beautiful, beautiful city with the Tivoli Gardens that are alive in the middle of summer. And I think it's a great time to visit Scandinavia because, of course, you know, they're not exactly known for good weather for so much of the year. But in July, it's the peak of everything. It's just past midsummer, which is their celebration of the summer solstice. And everybody's in the streets and festive and joyous. It's a great time. Well, from there, we'll head up to Stockholm. Stockholm, with its archipelago of islands, is probably my favorite of the Scandinavian capitals. I just find the place so endearing. The city hall that you see there in the reddish building with the gold top on it. The tower is where the Nobel Prize, not the Peace Prize, but all the other Nobel Prizes are given out. And Stockholm, again, in the summertime, so green, people are out in boats. It just oozes this wonderful Swedish culture. We'll go and do a smorgasbord, which is, you've heard the term before, it originates from Sweden. And it's a terrific thing to do. From here, we'll take the ferry. So the other nice thing about the 5x5 trips is not everything is by bus and by plane, but rather we're going to take the ferry boat, the overnight, like so many Scandinavians do, over to Helsinki, the capital of Finland, of course. And Helsinki is, yeah, I've been to Helsinki a couple of times, actually, oddly enough, both times in wintertime. And, you know, the Finns are so different than their counterparts, the Danes and the Swedes. They're much more laid back. At the same time, they're fiercely proud, and you really get a sense of that when you wander around in Helsinki. From there, we cross over to the Baltic states, and we'll be visiting all three Baltic capitals, starting with Tallinn. And Tallinn, where I have actually not been myself, but I've sent a number of travelers over there. A very, very colorful city, and Estonia as a whole has really been one of the most successful of the former Soviet countries. And so this medieval city, which has a wall all the way around it, is a combination of these beautiful old buildings, but also they're some of the leaders in all of Europe in their technology sector. We'll then head down to the last two stops will be Riga, the capital of Latvia, and Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. Again, very, very charming cities, not on a lot of people's bucket lists, but to spend 5 days in each and see not only the capitals themselves, but some of the surrounding countryside, and get an insight into all the heritage. And, let's face it, I have a lot of friends at home that are of Estonian or Lithuanian or Latvian background, and to be able to see these countries that they hailed from, or where their parents and grandparents came from, is something that's very, very interesting. So that's our 5x5 to Scandinavia and the Baltic countries. There's just one more shot there from, I believe that's Vilnius. And we'll be running that trip, as I say, in July of 2023. But of course, this coming summer, or I should say next summer as well. Then a new trip, a lot of people had been asking us about Scotland and Ireland. And I had to give a lot of thought to this one because, on one hand, you can go and sort of do the run-of-the-mill trip of Scotland, but I thought, let's go and actually stay in some of these wonderful castle hotels that we have. So we're going to spend 5 nights in 5 different castle hotels in 5 different parts of Ireland and Scotland. And so probably we'll be starting off in and around Dublin, or perhaps to the south of Dublin. Here you can see, this is a picture of the Ashford Castle, which is in Waterford, to the south of Dublin, between Dublin and Cork. And you can imagine what it's like to stay in one of these 16th, 17th century castles. Some of them are even older. So you really, really feel like the royalty of those times. And often again, these tend to be weekend getaways for locals. So you barely have a chance to actually enjoy the place that you're staying in. And I know that when we've stayed, in India and other places around the world in these wonderful palaces, people always say, I'd like to stay longer so I can really have the feeling like the nobility that used to stay in these places. We'll also visit ruins of castles as well, of course, and there's plenty of those in Ireland, Scotland. So we'll do the eastern part and the southern part of Ireland, and then up on the west coast, like Galway, where they have some wonderful castles like Ballynahinch in County Connemara. And then we'll head over for the second part of our 5x5 to Scotland, and one of our stops will be Glen Apt Castle that you see here, which is in the Dumfries region south of Glasgow. And then we'll head up to the wonderful countryside around, I jumped ahead, around Fort William, which is at the base of Ben Nevis, the highest mountain in the United Kingdom, and we'll stay here at Glen Ap Castle, for example. So that's our castles program. I thought a little bit of a different way to get a taste of the wonderful countryside that we get in Scotland and Ireland, but at the same time taking in some of the highlights that you would see on an ordinary tour. And this one is certainly far from ordinary. We're going to be running in August sorry, it says June, but we're going to be running this, I think, probably in August of 2023. This is our Germany and the Benelux program. We're going there this coming August, again, August of 2022, so 1 year from now. The idea here with this 5x5 is that, you know, oftentimes when we think of Germany, we think of the bigger cities, you know, like Berlin and Frankfurt and so on. And not to mention in the Benelux countries, oftentimes people head for Amsterdam in the Netherlands or to Brussels. And so on our 5x5 program here, we'll be staying in one big city, that's Munich at the beginning. And Munich, of course, the capital of Bavaria and the capital of beer in Germany, and with some wonderful places to visit around. So we'll take a day trip down to Neuschwanstein Castle, which is, of course, the famous Cinderella Castle, and have time as well to explore Munich, you know, the headquarters of BMW. The Olympics were held in Munich, as we will recall. And then from Munich, the second stop on our 5x5 trip will be Heidelberg. And Heidelberg, as you may know, on the Rhine River, just to the north of Black Forest. And here, again, a wonderful point to be able to explore south to the Black Forest, into the Mosel region, which is famous for the German wines. And Heidelberg itself is, again, oozing with flavor and culture. It's a university town, actually, so it has a very youthful flair to it. We'll then head up to Aachen, Germany. And here you can see Aachen is in an area of Germany called the Ruhr region, which is actually the industrial part of Germany, but it's right close to the border of both Belgium and Netherlands. And so from Aachen, we can do day trips to Cologne, which has its own spectacular cathedral, but also up to Maastricht, which is the city in the southernmost part of the Netherlands. And of course, you'll be familiar with the Treaty of Maastricht, for example. It's also where the European courts are located. And then we can head into the countryside of southeastern Belgium. So it's a sort of a strategic location there. And Aachen itself, which has its delicious gingerbread cookies. I remember that from having first visited that town a long time ago. We'll then head over to Ghent in Belgium. And this picture, I think, captures quite well the incredible architecture of Ghent. And again, like Belgium is a relatively small country. I mean, you can pretty much hit all points in one day. And so I think for me, Ghent is the best place to stay. And from here, we go up to Bruges on the English Channel, which is famous for its lace and all of its art Deco buildings, Ghent itself. And we can also head into Brussels, which is a very busy city, of course, being the capital of the European Union. From there, we'll cross the border to the north and go into the Netherlands and visit the city of Utrecht, which is I would have to say is my favorite city in the Netherlands. Why? Because they affectionately call it Little Amsterdam. And I think this picture, it kind of alludes to the reason why. It's full of canals. In the summertime, people are out dining on the sides of the canals and bicycles around. It is really such a charming city. And 35, 40 minutes away, you can hop on the train, and the train system, of course, in this part of Europe is really amazing. You can be in Amsterdam, you can be in Rotterdam, you can be in The Hague, all over. Our final stop on this 5x5 will be Bremen, Germany. So we head up along the so-called Friesen coast of Germany. That's the northwestern coast of Germany, and head to Bremen. Bremen is, of course, the home of the Brothers Grimm. We'll remember them from the fairy tales. And once again, it's a great spot to just hang out for a few days. We'll make side trips to the port of Bremerhaven, which is where a lot of European trade goes from. It's a huge container port, so it sounds very industrial, but it's actually very fascinating to see. And the city of Hamburg, which I think is the most beautiful big city in Germany. And that will be the last point on our 5x5 around Germany and the Benelux countries. Also, at the end of August next year, we're going to be going back on our Trans-Siberian Railway program. This is one that we're also doing next year in 2022. In fact, we have pretty much a full group on that. The Trans-Siberian Railway is undoubtedly the most iconic rail journey in the world, largely because it's long, almost 9,000 kilometers in length. It starts in Moscow, of course, with Red Square, as you can see here. And the incredibly colorful buildings, and not to mention the gigantic buildings that they have in Moscow. We aboard our train, the Tsar's Gold, which is quite a luxurious chartered train, and it will take us on this journey, as I say, almost 9,000 kilometers across 7 time zones, through beautiful cities like Yekaterinburg here, which is of course where the last Tsars of Russia lived before the family was executed at the beginning of the 20th century, and on through to Lake Baikal, which is one of the largest lake by volume in the world. It's spectacular. The train meanders on a special set of tracks. It's not the main tracks anymore. Literally for about a day and a half, we are going along this incredible body of water. We then cross over into Mongolia through the Gobi Desert that you see here. It's actually most of it is a semi-arid desert. And the last part of our trip, the train ends on the border to China, and we embark on we do the last leg by coach so that we can visit Datong, as well as, of course, parts of the Great Wall of China. This trip, if you have any notion or inkling to do a grand railway adventure, the Trans-Siberian is certainly for you. I've got a couple of a little bit off the beaten track trips that I wanted to put forth, because again, sometimes I have members saying, you got anything that's a bit different? I've been to all these other places before. So one of our small ship cruise partners is introducing a brand new itinerary called Around the Black Sea, 6 countries. And so this particular trip begins in Istanbul on the Bosphorus, which of course connects the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And so we'll spend a couple of days in Istanbul before we head by ship north on the Bosphorus and then along the south coast of Turkey. So we'll visit a couple of ports of call of cities that you will never heard of before, because quite frankly, I hadn't heard of them until we looked into them, but you get an insight into parts of Turkey that would otherwise not be on the normal tourist trail. We'll then head over to the east coast of the Black Sea, where we'll have Georgia, the country of Georgia, that is, of course, Batumi, Georgia, and then up around to the north shore of the Black Sea, visiting Sochi, Russia. Sochi, of course, was yet another Olympic city. There seem to be a lot of Olympic cities on our webinar today. And Sochi sits, of course, in the shadow of the Caucasus Mountains as well. We'll then continue to hit the Crimean Peninsula. And of course, Crimea has been a lot in the news in recent years, of course, because of Russia's annexation of part of the Crimean Peninsula. The countryside here is beautiful. This is the getaway part for so many of the Russian politicians and just frankly anybody in Russia, because the countryside in Crimea is so beautiful, particularly the cities of Odessa and Sevastopol. And so there will be some incredible stops. This trip will be 2 weeks in total duration, and the last few days of the trip will be hitting the Eastern European countries of Romania and Bulgaria. We'll hit the ports of Constanța and Varna. Here you can see the very grandiose casino in Constanța, Romania. And that will be our Around the Black Sea trip that we will be doing in September of 2023. Another popular trip, which we introduced on our railway series that last fall, I think it was about a year ago, we talked about the train journeys becoming ever more popular. And so we wanted to give you a couple of very, very epic journeys. And this one here is the African Rail Odyssey, which is from Cape Town at the southern tip of South Africa. and goes all the way up through 5 countries, ending in Dar es Salaam, the capital of Tanzania. Rovos Rail, and I had the pleasure a number of years ago of traveling on Rovos Rail. It is incredible. It is the most luxurious train in the world. I think it's certainly the most luxurious one that I've ever been on. All of the carriages have been restored into this beautiful mahogany like you see here. This is one of the lounge cars. And again, here I had to drop in a couple of pictures of Rovos Rail because I think the train experience here is as opulent as you'll find anywhere in the world. It's first class service, incredible gourmet dining on board, delicious, particularly South African wines. So if you're gonna travel halfway up the continent of Africa, then I can honestly say this is the way to do it. And the trip will start in, of course, Cape Town, which doesn't need much introduction. If you haven't been there before, Cape Town is one of my favorite cities. In fact, South Africa is an incredible country. The picture, I think, does it more justice than my words can. A truly spectacular location between the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. From there, over 6,000 kilometers, we wind our way north up to Victoria Falls, which is, of course, between Zimbabwe and Zambia. We'll continue up through Zambia into ending up in Tanzania, where we'll visit some game reserves on the way, like the Salus Game Reserve that you see here, and a number of other places until we hit Dar es Salaam, and we'll probably cap our lengthy rail journey off with a few days in Zanzibar off the coast of Tanzania. And that will be our African Odyssey rail journey. Later that month in September of 2023, we're going to be going back to India. And India was the first unofficial wheel and anchor trip. A group of members many of whom inspired us to start Wheel and Anchor some years back. I took them on a journey around Rajasthan in the heart of India. And I recall it was interesting because it required some persuasion of some of the people who weren't so sure about going to India, because of course, if you haven't been there before, it conjures up images of pure chaos and packed with people and pollution and traffic and cows in the street. And believe me, they do have cows in the street in Mumbai and New Delhi. But India is something that truly, truly must be experienced, I think, once in your life. This is a shot of New Delhi. And, I remember, for example, many tidbits, but New Delhi being actually a very green city, and the tuk-tuks and such friendly people that we found all across India. We will do the classic stops of Rajasthan, like Jodhpur and Udaipur, of course, here, the floating palace that was made famous in the James Bond movie several years back, Octopussy, actually. We stayed here when we went on our first trip to India, as well as Jaipur, and we will visit the Ranthambore National Park and go in search of that elusive Bengal tiger that you see here. There's not many of them left in the world, but Ranthambore near Sawai Madhopur in India is one of the places that we can see them. And of course, you can't visit India without stopping at the Taj Mahal in Agra, and that will round out our Golden Triangle Heart of Rajasthan trip that we will do in September of 2023. From there, actually the first ever official, so that one was the first unofficial Wheel and Anchor trip. The first official one was to Georgia and Armenia. You might have thought it might have been to like France or Italy, but no, actually the very first trip that we took, which was in 2019, so it'll be 4 years since we went by the time we go next year. Sorry, it was 2018, excuse me, 5 years. It seems like yesterday. We visited the countries of Georgia and Armenia, which are, of course, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And I know that a few of our on that trip were really, really surprised and taken it back. And they went on it because, they were all pretty well-traveled people and they'd kind of been everywhere else. And so where else is there left to go? Well, Georgia and Armenia. And some of the highlights of these countries here, the Kakheti Valley, again in the shadow of the Caucasus Mountains. This is the eastern end of the Caucasus Mountains that make their way down to Azerbaijan. And here, this is the wine part of Georgia. And Georgia was actually the birthplace of wines. They found wines here dating back some 3,000 years before Christ. It's truly incredible landscape and really amazing food. And a little anecdote about food in Georgia is that the country was so poor that they couldn't even afford fertilizers, even during the Soviet days. So the food is actually all organic in Georgia, which makes it quite interesting. The capital city of Tbilisi here with its colorful balconies, very hilly mountainous countryside, and Tbilisi also is known for its sulfur baths. And a number of members, we went and tried these out, these centuries old baths, similar to what you'd find in Istanbul and other parts of Turkey, but at the same time, very unique to Georgia. We then headed up into the Caucasus Mountains, which is of course the highest mountains in Europe. A lot of people think Mont Blanc, but of course Mount Elbrus. This isn't Mount Elbrus. This is actually a photo that I took from our trip of the Gorgeti Trinity Church, which is high up in the shadow of Mount Kazbegi that you see here, which is almost 6,000 meters in elevation. You can see the church down on the left. This was a picture from our actual trip, and the countryside, well, again, needs no introduction. Another beautiful mountain that we'll see on our trip through Georgia and Armenia, of course, is here in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. Excuse me, and that's Mount Ararat in the background, which of course is the fabled resting place of Noah's Ark. And Yerevan, again, a city that before we had made that trip, I hadn't had the pleasure of traveling to, but we were all really pleasantly surprised about, you know, the level of activity, the hustle bustle, the incredible galleries. I think we all felt it was a place that we could go back to. So if you've ever thought about getting to this part of sort of Central Asia, then this would be the way to do it. Another 5x5 trip that we are going to be running in the fall of 2023 is Southeast Asia. And so this trip is designed a little bit for those of you who didn't do any backpacking, perhaps in your postgraduate years. And so I thought to myself, well, again, if I look at the classic tour itineraries around Asia, and you know, it's a couple of days here and a couple of days there, and there's hardly any time really to just wander around on your own and get the feeling of what Asian culture is all about. So on this 5x5, we're going to be visiting Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand. So we'll do 1 or 2 cities in each, starting off with Hanoi, which is of course the capital of Vietnam. And from Hanoi, a trip that you definitely have to do. One of my favorite places in the world for scenery is Halong Bay, where, well, here you can see it's a whole archipelago of mountains that rise practically vertically out of the sea. And so one thing, I think one of the fallacies that people have about Southeast Asia is that, you know, there's a certain nervousness about going there because, you know, they're big cities, you know, we can't read the language, the writing and so on. But yet they're so incredibly friendly and there's so much that you can do on your own. And, you know, it's nice to have the security of a host that's not far away, but you can walk around and you can take in all these cities. And it's really an important thing to do, and not just be sort of on the inside of a tour bus. We'll go here to Angkor Wat, which is of course Cambodia's most famous monument, and actually the largest archaeological site of its kind in the world. It is truly stupendous. And then we'll also stop here in Chiang Mai. This is Doi Suthep, and Chiang Mai, Thailand is so well known for the golden temples that you see scattered all the way around the country, and we'll find them in Laos as well. We'll visit likely Luang Prabang, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And again, with 5 nights, which means 4 full days in each, you'll have half the time to do the sightseeing, to see the most important parts. But more importantly, you'll have time to go out and visit the markets and try the local food and talk to the locals and just, you know, sit in cafes and sip tea. I think this will be an amazing trip. This is the Krone Sea waterfalls in Luang Prabang, Laos. So not only do you have incredible cities, incredible historical sites, but the landscape, particularly in Laos, with these incredible forested rolling hills. We think often so much of Asia as being so congested, like I was talking about Japan, but there's so much natural beauty here to see as well. Another off the beaten track part of the world, and I know that some members, when we're getting close to the end, I know that some of our members have asked about visiting the stand countries, and I've planned a few trips for travelers from Canada through the stand countries. And the biggest challenge about getting around this part of the world is the distances, because the infrastructure isn't fabulous. So if you do it by road, you spend hours and hours and hours on buses, on roads that are not quite as good as our highways. And it's really quite rough going. But taking the Orient Silk Road Express, this is again a chartered train. You can see here, not my taste of decor, but at the same time, it's a very, very comfortable way to travel around this part of Central Asia. And this particular trip will be 2 weeks in duration. It'll start off in Almaty, which is the main commercial capital of Kazakhstan, and we'll visit Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. So we'll visit at least 4 of the stand countries. Some of the things that we'll see here, for example, Lake Issyk, which, like Lake Baikal in Siberia, is a very, very deep lake. In fact, it's the 7th deepest lake in the world, at the foot of the Tian Shan Mountains. So we get, once again, the juxtaposition between incredible natural scenery, but then what this part of Asia, which is of course part of the Silk Road, is well known for, are some of these trading cities that where traders have gone for centuries, have been bringing goods from China and from the Far East over to Europe. And like here, Bukhara, the city of 1,000 monuments, in Uzbekistan, and also the various markets that you see in cities like Khiva and Samarkand. And again, the whole thing by rail, stopping pretty much every day to take in some of these incredible places through 4 of the 5 stand countries. Once again, on the exotic destination list, we have Brahmaputra River and Bhutan. So the Brahmaputra is really one of the great rivers of the world, even if you haven't heard of it before. It flows out of the Himalaya mountains through the so-called Uttar Pradesh region of India, which is most famous for Assam, which is where a lot of the tea in India is grown. So there's Darjeeling is one of the tea areas, and then Assam. And so the great Brahmaputra River is quite an interesting one to cruise down, largely because not a lot of people do it. And we're going to be doing it on this vessel here. This belongs to the Pandau fleet. Ironically, I was actually sailed on this vessel some years back when she was in Myanmar. And I love these boats because they have kept them all in the original teak. These are replicas of boats that were built for the settlement, for the colonization of Myanmar, or Burma as it was known then. They've relocated a couple of these ships to India, to Brahmaputra, and they are super comfy. They're not deluxe, but they're definitely solid 4-star, wonderful service and food, and you get to experience some of this very, very remote part of India. We'll see some, or we'll be on the search at least for some of the wildlife that's endemic to this part of the world. This is the Indian rhinoceros, as differs from the black and white rhinos from southern part of Africa. They also have here the Bengal tigers as well in Kazirunga National Park, that is in the southern part of the Assam region, and then the very endangered golden langur monkeys. And these are a few of the things that we see, not to mention the tea plantations. And again, this is one of the things that's very, very important product from Assam, India, is tea. So all the while along the river with the backdrop of the Himalayas, where of course the river originates from. The second part of our trip will be to Bhutan. And Bhutan, very secretive, for many, many years it was closed off. You couldn't even get into the kingdom of Bhutan at all. You've probably seen this pictures before. This is the Tiger's Nest Monastery, one of many, many very colorful, very unique places amongst the backdrop of the Himalayas. Between Nepal, where I have been, and Bhutan, some of the most incredible mountain scenery that you'll find anywhere in the world, but also the festivals and the colorful people. And this is what I find special about traveling around northern India, Nepal, Bhutan, is that you get to experience, you know, some of these traditions that you just simply don't exist in a lot of other places anymore. So that's our Brahmaputra and the Bhutan trip that'll be held in the fall of 2023. And I think our second to last trip that I'm going to be talking about today, Morocco. Morocco, obviously a country on the northwestern part of Africa. And Morocco is very unique, because when we think of Africa, you know, we tend to think of sub-Saharan Africa. We don't think about the states in the north, because a lot of them, let's face it, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, and so on, are not really the most optimal places to be traveling now. But Morocco is quite different, and it has its own unique character. Here, you see the city of Casablanca, which is a must visit, and on any visit to Morocco, we'll cross over to Fez as well. And then Morocco, like many of these Arab-influenced states, is known for their souks. And this particular one is one of the souks in Marrakesh. Marrakesh is a city I will never, ever forget. I have stories that I could tell you, but we don't have time on this webinar today. But it's a city of tons of squares. My best memory of Morocco perhaps is their mint tea, and they serve it in these silver teapots like you see here, and these guys with their red tunics, they literally lift the teapot about a meter above your glass and pour the tea anytime that you're welcomed into somebody's home or into a hotel. One of the very endearing things about Morocco. We'll obviously cross the Atlas Mountains as well to go to the western edge of the Sahara Desert, where we'll spend a night or two at a luxurious tented Bedouin camp, much like the one that you see here, because let's face it, part of Morocco is all about the experience of the desert and the camels and the Bedouins and what that culture is all about. So that's going to be a pretty exciting trip in October of 2023. And then in keeping with the Arab part of the world, Oman. So we're going to be going to Oman in November of 2023. I'm gunning for a cousin of mine actually to be leading this tour, because he's been there about 17 times, and he wrote a wonderful book about Oman for the Sultan many years back. And this trip to Oman will be divided into two parts. We're actually going to take a week cruising up the coast of Oman through the Gulf of Oman to the area called the Musandam Peninsula. Oman here is actually separated by the United Arab Emirates. And so this northern tip, the Musandam Peninsula, has absolutely, you know, next to Norway, perhaps the most breathtaking coastal scenery. You can see the mountains here, very arid, very rugged mountains, spectacular country that, again, relatively few cruises of any kind operate in this particular region. So we'll spend a week visiting various ports of call along the coast. We'll then visit the capital of Muscat, a colorful city, a vibrant city. And, you know, Oman is very different than some of its neighbors. I mean, we've all heard about the problems in Yemen, and we know the human rights challenges in Saudi Arabia and so on. But, you know, Oman, although it's not a super wealthy country, but at the same time, you know, people here have a normal sort of a standard of living. So it makes it so much easier to appreciate. And the Omanis are sort of well regarded, and it's sorts of inspiration for other parts of the Arab world. Much of Oman is, of course, covered by desert, almost 750,000 square kilometers. And if we're lucky and you get a little bit of rain, then much of the desert comes into these blooms that only last for, a day or two. But just witnessing the vastness of the desert in Oman is incredible. It's also got wadis, or basically like oases scattered through. This particular one here is called Wadi Shab, and is one of the many, very different spots that we'll see along this trip. So that is our trip to Oman. And the very last one I'll present today is our LiveAway, our last LiveAway in 2023, which is going to be Colombia. And a lot of people, we put this on our survey actually last year when we did our survey about LiveAways, because I was looking for something different. And I know that, again, I like to be a little bit different in travel. And Colombia has a bit of an image about it, because let's face it, for so many years, it was one of those places you just didn't dare travel because obviously of the drug cartels and the severe violence that was there. And the first time I went to Colombia was probably 20 years ago. And at that time, I swore I would never come back. But I went there again about 5 years ago, and I was completely blown away about the transformation that I had seen. And here, this is a view overlooking the city of Bogota, and it doesn't really exactly do it justice, but Bogota, the capital, is now a very cosmopolitan, a very friendly city, clean. They close all the streets down on Sundays so that people can ride their bikes around. And it has a wonderful old town section. And most of it is completely safe. You can walk around and admire the city, which has European influences, but at the same time is very much a Latin American, how should we say, monument. And Colombia as a whole is kind of now turned into one of the pride of nations of South America, because it has done so well economically and so well in the standard of living. So we'll spend 2 weeks in Bogota, visiting some very unique places like the Salt Cathedral in Zipaquiros, which is a little bit north of Bogota. And we'll hit the Cocora Valley, which is known, which is the coffee region of Colombia. Of course, we all know about Colombian coffee. And then the last part of our trip will be in Medellin. And, Medellin is a super beautiful city. They call it the city of flowers. Keep in mind that this whole interior part of Bogota is all very high in elevation, but it's basically right at the equator. So the climate in Colombia, this was the thing I wanted to mention. The climate is mild almost all year round. It's like the perfect place to live from a temperature standpoint. So we'll spend a couple of weeks enjoying and soaking up this very unique, this very cultural city. It was the South American city of culture, I think year before last, if my memory serves me correct. And I think that rounds out our list of trip inspiration survey destinations for 2023. Thank you very much for bearing with me. If you do have any questions now, I'd be happy to take them. I know we've covered a lot of ground today, but I hope that gives you at least some ideas of what we might get up to. If any of those things sort of sparks your interest, if you hadn't thought about going to any of them, then when you get that survey, if you haven't already filled it in, then click on the pre-release button. Yes, I'd like to be on the pre-release list, and then we will get that over to you. So let's see, Joel, are there any questions that have come in? Let's see here. Okay, I don't think I see any questions. I didn't expect a lot of questions because I gave you so much information. You're probably still digesting it all. This survey in 2 parts or 1. The survey is all in 1 part. So there's roughly 40 destinations in total on the survey. And so it's 1 long survey. And as I say, it was in the newsletter. It was in the webinar last week, in the newsletter last week, and it'll be in the newsletter this week. And probably for the next couple of weeks, we will run the survey until about mid-September. Morocco, our trip around Morocco will be roughly 12 days in duration, 11 or 12 days. And that'll give us a good couple of days to in each of the cities like Casablanca, Fez, and Marrakesh, and also some time to take in the Atlas Mountains and the desert. The survey, by the way, only takes about 10 minutes because it's just one destination per slide, and there's a photo, a quick blurb about what we're going to be doing, and a yes, I'm interested, or no, I'm not. So it doesn't take long at all. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your indulgence. Next week on Thursday, we're going to be visiting the first part of our France Kaleidoscope program that we're going to be running in October of 2022. So on September the 2nd, if you're interested in Normandy and the landing beaches of D-Day, that's the first part of that trip. Join us next week for that webinar. And of course, as always, if you have any questions or if you just want to talk about travel, drop me a note, because you can see I love to talk about travel and all of the incredible places we have around the world. Thank you so much, Air Routes for Morocco. Joel will tell me who asked that question, and I will let you know how we get to Morocco. Thank you again for joining us. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and look forward to catching up with you again next week.